All right, so today we're diving into something that I think a lot of English learners struggle with. It's that fear of actually speaking, like you're studying and you're learning, but then you freeze up when it's time to talk.
Oh, yeah, big time. I remember when I was learning.
Right. So we found this really interesting episode of a language learning podcast, and it's all about getting over that
I
fear.
like that, breaking it down.
Yeah, they break it down and give you these really cool strategies for actually, conquering it.
Nice.
And one of the things they emphasize right from the start is that every fluent English speaker was a beginner once.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to forget that.
It is. You look at someone who just sounds so effortless and you think like, oh my gosh, I'll never get there. But everybody starts somewhere.
Totally. I mean, think about any skill, right? You don't just magically become amazing overnight.
So true. So this podcast breaks down this fear of speaking into three main parts. And the first one they talk about is this perfectionism trap.
Oh, the perfectionism trap. Yeah, it's a big one.
Huge. And they make this really interesting analogy about musicians or dancers, right? Like imagine if a musician refused to practice because they were afraid of hitting a wrong note.
Or a dancer afraid of making a wrong step. You'd never get anywhere.
Never. You have to make those mistakes to learn and grow.
Exactly. And the podcast really emphasizes that making mistakes is actually essential to the learning process.
Yeah, and it's like those mistakes become your own personal language coaches. They're showing you where you need to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. It's like, oh, I messed up that verb tense. Okay, that's something I need to focus on.
Right. So instead of beating yourself up for mistakes, you can actually use them to your advantage.
And the other thing is, most native English speakers, they aren't really focused on every little grammar mistake you might make. They're more interested in understanding what you're trying to say.
That's such a good point. I think sometimes we build up this fear of judgment in our minds, and it's just not realistic.
Yeah, people are generally pretty forgiving, especially when they see you're making an effort to communicate in their language.
For sure. Like, I know I've hesitated to speak up before because I was terrified of sounding stupid, but when you realize that people are actually pretty supportive,
It makes a huge difference. It takes some of the pressure off, right?
huge difference. And that actually leads us to the second big barrier this podcast talks about, the fear of judgment.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one for a lot of learners. And they talk about this really cool concept called the confidence ladder.
Okay, the confidence ladder. Tell me more about this.
So it's basically this idea that you can build up your confidence gradually by starting with lower stakes situations and then working your way up.
I like that. So kind of like starting small and getting comfortable before you move on to bigger challenges.
Exactly. So maybe you start with a language learning app where there's no pressure to be perfect. And then maybe you move on to like online conversations with other learners.
Right, where you can kind of practice in a more relaxed environment.
Yeah. And eventually you'll feel more confident and ready to have conversations with native speakers in real life situations.
And what I like about this latter idea is that it really emphasizes communication as the ultimate goal, right?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, people are more interested in understanding your message than they are in analyzing your grammar.
So true. It's about connecting with others, sharing ideas, expressing yourself.
It takes the focus off of being perfect, which can be so liberating.
For sure. So we've talked about the perfectionism trap and the fear of judgment. What's the third piece of this fear puzzle?
The third one is all about our internal dialogue, that little voice in our heads that can sometimes sabotage us.
Ugh, yes. That voice can be the worst.
It's the voice that tells us we're not good enough, we'll sound stupid, everyone's judging us.
I know exactly what you mean. It's so easy to get caught up in that negative self-talk.
It really is. But the podcast offers some great advice for dealing with that voice, and it all starts with becoming aware of it.
Okay, so first you have to recognize when that negative voice is taking over. Then what?
Then you can start to challenge those negative thoughts. And that's where positive affirmations come in.
Ah, I love positive affirmations.
Me too. It's so powerful. So instead of saying things like, I'm afraid to speak, you can try saying things like, I'm learning, I'm making progress. Or like, what if I actually have a great conversation?
Right. It's about shifting your focus to the positive, to what you want to achieve.
Exactly. It's about building yourself up instead of tearing yourself down.
So we're talking about rewiring our brains, basically. And the podcast also talks about some other really cool techniques for boosting confidence. Like, did you hear about the Courage playlist?
Oh, yeah. I love that idea. It's all about using music to get yourself in the right headspace for speaking English.
It's like we all know how music can impact our mood, right?
Totally. Like, I find that upbeat instrumental music helps me shake off those pre-speaking jitters. What about you?
You know, I haven't really thought about it that strategically, but I'm definitely going to try that now.
It can make a big difference. And they also talk about creating a pre-speaking ritual, like something you do to signal to your brain that it's go time.
I love that. Like a power pose or a breathing exercise or something.
Exactly. Whatever works for you to get into that confident mindset.
It's like how athletes have those pre-game rituals to get in the zone.
Yeah. So we've covered the perfectionism trap, the fear of judgment, and this whole thing about negative self-talk. What would you say is like the overall message here?
I think the overall message is that speaking English is not about reaching some impossible level of perfection. It's about connecting with people, sharing your ideas, and expressing yourself.
Beautifully said.
And it's about enjoying the journey, embracing those stumbles as opportunities to learn and grow. Every conversation, no matter how small, is a step forward.
And I think that's a perfect place to pause and reflect on everything we talked about so far.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, but the main thing is that the fear of speaking English is something you can overcome.
Absolutely. It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to start. And with the right mindset and the right strategies, you can really unlock the power of communication.
Couldn't agree more. So take a moment to absorb all this good stuff, and we'll be back soon with more insights from this awesome podcast.
And you know, one thing that really struck me about this podcast is how they redefine success in language learning.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, they challenge that traditional idea of fluency being like, perfect grammar, perfect accent.
Yeah, that can be so intimidating, right? Like, you feel like you have to sound exactly like a native speaker to be considered fluent.
Right. And they're saying, no, it's not about that. It's about being able to effectively communicate and connect with others, even if you make mistakes along the way.
I love that. It's more about the purpose of language, which is communication, not about chasing some, impossible ideal.
Exactly. And it makes the whole process so much less daunting,
Right.
It's like, okay, I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be able to get my message across.
And that takes the pressure off big time. And it encourages us to, celebrate those small wins along the way, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like every time you have a conversation, every time you try a new phrase, every time you understand something you didn't before.
Those are all victories.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in what we haven't mastered yet that we forget to appreciate how far we've already come.
It's true. And I think that's such an important reminder, not just for language learning, but for anything we're trying to learn or improve at.
Yeah, be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Celebrate the progress. Focus on the joy of learning, not on striving for some unattainable standard of perfection. It's a journey.
Totally. And speaking of the journey, the podcast also talks about the importance of finding the right learning resources and strategies that actually work for you. Because there's no one-size-fits-all approach, right?
Right. What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. So it's about experimenting, trying different things, and seeing what resonates with your learning style and your goals.
So whether it's language exchange apps, online courses, textbooks, podcasts, real-life conversations.
Yeah, all of that. It's about finding what fits your needs and preferences.
And being open to trying new approaches.
Yeah, right.
Always looking for ways to level up your learning game.
For sure. I'm curious, what are some of the resources that have been most helpful for you, in your language learning journey?
That's a good question. I've found that for me, it's really a combination of things. I love the interactivity of language exchange apps, but I also really appreciate the structure and guidance of online courses.
Yeah, I get that. I think having a mix of different approaches can be really beneficial.
Totally. And of course, nothing beats real-life conversations for truly immersing yourself in the language.
Absolutely. That's where the magic happens.
For sure. And another thing the podcast talks about is the importance of community. Finding a supportive network of other learners and mentors who can offer encouragement and feedback. What do you think about that?
I think it's crucial. Having that sense of community, surrounding yourself with like-minded people, it can make a world of difference.
It really can. It's you're not alone in this. There are other people who are going through the same struggles, celebrating the same victories.
Exactly. And it creates a safe space to practice and make mistakes without that fear of judgment we were talking about earlier. Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Oh, absolutely. I've found so much support and encouragement from other language learners, both online and offline. It's really helped me stay motivated, especially on those days when I'm feeling, a little bit discouraged.
I hear ya. It's a reminder that we're all in this together. And speaking of connecting with others, the podcast also emphasizes the importance of interacting with native speakers as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's one thing to learn from textbooks and apps, but there's something special about that authentic communication with native speakers. What do you think?
I think it's invaluable. It helps you to, develop a more natural flow and rhythm. You get exposed to different accents and dialects.
And you learn about the culture behind the language.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about the rules of grammar and vocabulary.
Totally. It's about understanding how language is used in real-life contexts. And that's something you can only really get from interacting with native speakers.
And it's about those, like, aha moments when you suddenly grasp a subtle nuance or a cultural reference that you wouldn't have picked up from a textbook.
Oh, yeah. Those moments are so rewarding. It's like a little light bulb goes off in your head and you're like, I get it now.
It's those moments that really deepen your understanding of the language and the culture. Have you had any of those aha moments that stand out in your memory?
Oh, definitely. I remember once.
I love those aha moments. They're the best.
Yeah.
Like suddenly a whole new layer of understanding opens up.
Yeah, they're so cool.
Yeah.
And you know what? The podcast actually encourages listeners to actively seek out more of those opportunities to interact with native speakers.
Okay, so how do they suggest doing that?
Well, they talk about joining conversation groups or attending cultural events, things like that.
Makes sense. Immersing yourself in the language and culture.
Exactly. And even just striking up conversations with, people you meet in everyday life, like if you're at the store or a coffee shop.
Right. Just
Yeah.
putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
So we've talked about shifting our mindset, embracing mistakes, celebrating small wins, finding the right resources, building a supportive community.
Mm-hmm.
But what about when things get tough? Because learning a language, it's not always easy. There are going to be times when you feel frustrated or discouraged.
Oh, for sure. And the podcast really emphasizes the importance of patience and perseverance. It's like learning any new skill. It takes time and effort. And there will be ups and downs along the way.
It's so true. It's like training for a marathon. You wouldn't expect to run, 26 miles on your first day out.
Exactly. You start with shorter distances and you gradually build up your endurance.
And you have to be patient with yourself and trust the process.
Yes, trust the process. And just like a marathon runner needs fuel to keep going, it helps to remind yourself why you're learning English in the first place.
Oh, that's so important. Your why. What are your goals? What do you want to be able to do with this new language?
Right, because when you connect with those goals, it can be incredibly motivating, especially when you hit a rough patch.
It's like remembering your purpose. Why are you doing this? Whether it's for travel or work or personal growth or just the sheer joy of connecting with people from different cultures.
It's powerful stuff, and
Yeah.
it can help you to, push through those moments of doubt.
Totally. So to recap, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
exploring those core components of fear, practical strategies for overcoming them, the importance of mindset resources, community, and perseverance.
It's been a really insightful conversation.
It has. What would you say is the key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
I'd say the key takeaway is that the fear of speaking English is a common challenge, but it doesn't have to hold you back.
So well said.
You can absolutely overcome this fear, and you can unlock the incredible power of communication.
I love that. And I think it's something that resonates beyond just language learning. It's about facing any fear that's holding you back from, reaching your full potential.
Exactly. It's not about perfection. It's about connection.
It's about embracing the journey and celebrating every step you take towards fluency.
And all the amazing possibilities that come with it.
Beautifully said. Now, I know you have a thought-provoking question for our listeners, something to really get them thinking about their next steps. What is it?
Okay, so we've talked about the podcast's challenge to have a conversation in English today, right? Building on that, I would ask, what's one small specific action you can take right now to practice speaking English and build your confidence?
I like that.
And it doesn't have to be anything grand or intimidating, Maybe sending a voice message to a friend, watching a short video in English, or even just practicing a few phrases out loud.
Great ideas.
The important thing is to take action, no matter how small.
It all starts with that first step.
It does. Every step, every word, every conversation is a victory.
That's such a great note to end on. It's a reminder that we have the power to choose courage over fear
We do.
and to take those small steps that lead to big transformations.
And remember, you are not alone on this journey.
We're all in this together.
There's a whole community of English learners out there, including us, cheering you on every step of the way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
We did too.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting with the world through the power of language.